All right, good afternoon. Happy Friday as we take our seats. Just to remind you that 1 p.m. Here, or maybe just a little bit before, there will be a background briefing by a senior UN official on the Secretary General's upcoming trip to Southern Africa, which I will announce now. The Secretary General will be heading to South Africa and Lesotho next week. On Wednesday, he will be in South Africa, where he will meet with President Cyril Ramaphosa and other senior South African government officials. Discussions will focus on global and regional issues, but especially on South Africa's G20 presidency and its leadership on financing for development. The Secretary General will underscore that with South Africa taking the G20 helm and being the first African country to preside over the G20, there's a significant opportunity for the G20 to help advance Africa's priorities. On Thursday, the Secretary General will proceed to neighboring Lesotho, where he will meet with the King of Lesotho, Letsie III, the Prime Minister, and other officials. The Secretary General will seize this opportunity for this visit to show solidarity with the African continent that has been a victim of global injustices that are denying African nations rightful place on the world stage. The visit to Lesotho is symbolic, as it is a small island landlocked country that has suffered the dramatic impacts of climate change, which will cost African economies billions of dollars every year. While there, he's scheduled to address the parliament as Lesotho celebrates the bicentenary of the founding of the Basotho nation, a moment the Secretary General is honored to share with the people of Lesotho. The history of this country is rich, and its location in the heart of southern Africa and commitment to sustainable development puts it in a unique position. Prior to departing Lesotho, the Secretary General will visit the Katse Dam, which is central to the Lesotho Highlands Water Project and to water management in the broader region. I have a statement to share with you on Yemen. The Secretary General renews his call for the immediate and unconditional release of the humanitarian personnel arbitrarily detained by the Houthis in Yemen. It has now been 6 months since the detention of more than 50 personnel from the United Nations, international and national non-governmental organizations, from civil society and diplomatic missions, in addition to the 4 other UN personnel detained since 2021 and 2023, respectively. The Secretary General acknowledges the recent release of 1 UN staff member and 2 NGO personnel recently, but recalls that the continued arbitrary detention of dozens of others is unacceptable and constitutes a violation of international law. These detentions threaten the safety of humanitarian personnel and significantly impair efforts to assist millions of people in need. These actions are inconsistent with the genuine engagement in peace efforts. The United Nations, NGOs, and other relevant international partners are working through all possible channels and authorities to secure the immediate release of those arbitrarily detained. Also today, the Secretary General is appointing a group of prominent experts to promote actionable policy solutions and galvanize political and public support required to solve the debt crisis. This work will inform the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which is an intergovernmental process facilitated by the UN, which will take place from June 30th to July 3rd in Sevilla, in Spain, next year. The developing world is currently facing an unprecedented debt crisis, with dozens of countries struggling under the weight of debt service that threatens economic stability, social progress, and sustainable development. And yet, to date, the global response has fallen short. The group will be led by Mahmoud Mohideen, the UN Special Envoy on Financing for the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, and co-chaired by Paolo Gentiloni, the former European Commissioner for Economy, and Mr. Trevor Manuel, the former Minister of Finance of South Africa, and Ms. Yan Wang, the senior academic researcher at Boston University's Global Development Policy Center. That is being shared with you electronically as we speak. Turning to Syria and the continuing very worrying situation on the ground there, Since the escalation of hostilities, at least 370,000 men, women, and children, boys and girls, have been displaced, including 100,000 who left their homes more than once. Most of the displaced are women and children. Our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that tens of thousands of people have now arrived in northeast Syria. The UN Refugee Agency and NGOs operating in the northeast estimate that between 60,000 and 80,000 human beings have been newly displaced, including more than 25,000 currently hosted in shelters. These shelters are filling up as soon as they are assigned, with sites now at capacity. People are sleeping on the streets and in their cars in sub-zero temperature as winter has set on. The UN is working with our humanitarian partners in the Northeast to assess the needs of families who've arrived at reception centers. Meanwhile, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warns that as hostilities in the north escalate and expand to other parts of the country, civilians, including humanitarian workers, are facing grave threats to their safety. The fighting also continues to cause severe damage to critical infrastructure and, of course, is disrupting much-needed aid operations. According to local health authorities, hundreds of civilians are estimated to have been killed or injured over the past week. Although the situation is highly fluid, exact casualty figures have yet to be confirmed. Turning to the situation in Lebanon, we are aware of the mutual accusations that is being traded by the parties about the adherence to the cessation of hostilities. We urge all actors to abide by their commitments under the cessation of hostilities and also, of course, under Resolution 1701, and that commitment should be made both in letter and in spirit. Since the announcement of the cessation of hostilities, we have been actively engaged with the parties as well as the representatives of the United States and the representatives of France in support of the commitment made within UNIFIL's respective mandate. UNIFIL stands ready to support these efforts together with the Office of the Special Coordinator for Lebanon in line with the recommitments of their parties of their obligations under 1701. Peacekeepers in UNIFIL's area of operations in southeastern Lebanon conducted road clearing and repair tasks last week, rehabilitating sections of two vital roads connecting the country's southeast villages with the capital Beirut that were damaged during recent Israeli airstrikes. And turning to Lebanon, more than a week from the announcement of the cessation of hostilities, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that people are continuing to return to their communities. International Organization for Migration tells us that more than 786,000 people have begun returning to their communities since November 27th, with the largest in the Nabatea district, the El Nabatea district in Nabatea Governorate, Saida district in the South Governorate, and Baalbek district in the Baalbek El Hermel Governorate. Authorities report that collective shelters are now hosting 9,000 displaced people, down from 188,000 before 27 November. Delivering humanitarian aid remains challenging, with damage to civilian infrastructure hampering the response and hampering the recovery. The World Health Organization says that damaged health and sanitation infrastructure increases the risk of disease outbreaks, while vaccination rates have plummeted and thousands of people urgently need reconstructive surgery. 14 hospitals in Lebanon have been affected by the hostilities. WHO is working together with the authorities to help reopen hospitals that were forced to close. Turning to Gaza, our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that after 2 months under Israeli siege, the people of North Gaza Governorate continue to flee deadly violence and deprivation in areas further south. On Wednesday, more than 5,500 people in North Gaza were displaced to Gaza City after Israeli forces surrounded 3 schools and nearby homes in Beit Laia. Those arriving in Gaza City reported that Israeli forces had opened fire on people fleeing via the Saladin Road. Our partners said that those newly displaced from Beit Laia have sought safety at 3 shelters in Gaza City. This morning, more than a dozen families displaced from the areas around Kamal Adwan Hospital, North Gaza, also arrived in Gaza City. As of today, our partners tell us that about 8,000 people have been displaced towards Gaza City from the north just since November 28th. Aid organizations on the ground have been providing new arrivals with any available assistance. As winter sets in, some 545,000 people in Gaza are living in damaged buildings and makeshift shelters, underscoring the urgency of ensuring that thousands of tarpaulins and repair materials can be safely brought into the Strip without delay. The UN Population Fund says that 50 of the agency's trucks carrying blankets, generators, medicines, and surgical equipment have been stuck in the Egyptian border into Gaza, many of whom for more than 50 days. We and our partners continue to call for the safe passage of humanitarian aid into Gaza as suffering deepens across the Gaza Strip. And back here, our newly minted Special Representative and Special Representative Secretary General for Iraq, Mohammed al-Hassan, briefed the Security Council for the first time on the UN mission's work. He said that despite the many obstacles, Iraq today is more secure, more stable, and more open than it was 20 or even 5 years ago. He pointed to the recent milestones, including the successful conduct of the national census in late November and the election of a new speaker on October 31st, new speaker of the Council of Representatives, that is. In a region that is, quote, on fire, Mr. Hassan said Iraq's government has shown strong resolve to keep Iraq out of the widening regional conflict while standing firm as a strong voice for regional stability and peace. He added that the proposed amendment to Iraq's personal status law are a significant undertaking that could have far-reaching implications for women and children. He said the UN mission has extensively engaged with Iraqi stakeholders, emphasizing the need for a constructive and inclusive dialogue on this issue, and has further stressed that many reforms to the personal status law are in alignment with Iraq's international human rights, that any reform should be aligned with Iraq's obligations under international law. Turning to Haiti, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the humanitarian situation there remains dire for millions of people across the country. Insecurity continues to impact the capital, with tens of thousands of people remaining uprooted since the escalation of violence in November. OCHA also reports that ongoing floods are impacting thousands of people in both the north and the south of the country. In the face of these challenges, the UN and our humanitarian partners are supporting authorities and providing assistance to people who need it. In the capital, over the last week, UNICEF and its partners distributed more than 900,000 liters of water to more than 60,000 people in 26 sites across the capital region. For its part, WFP has provided more than 95,000 hot meals to some 24,000 displaced people across 4 sites in Port-au-Prince. And this week, mobile medical clinics operated by IOM were made accessible to about 14,000 people at 4 sites for displaced people. And in the south, we're continuing to support with our partners and coordinating with authorities the floods response and provide emergency aid, including hygiene kits and blankets, and implementing cash transfer activities. For example, IOM provided emergency kits to 4,000 people affected by the recent flooding in Lekai. Despite ongoing efforts, our response remains impacted by lack of funding, no surprise. As we enter the last week of the year, the $674 million humanitarian response plan remains only 43% funded, with $290 million only received. We would love for member states to show more generosity and send us cash for this and all our humanitarian responses. We reiterate our call that additional funding to ensure the dire situation does not further deteriorate. And in Somalia, our humanitarian coordinator there, George Conway, allocated $5 million from the Somalia Humanitarian Fund to take action for drought ahead of the predicted La Nina-induced rainfall deficits. The new fund will complement the recent $5 million released by the Central Emergency Fund of the UN and will support work in health, nutrition, water, sanitation, hygiene, and in high-risk areas. An estimated 4.4 million human beings in Somalia are facing elevated levels of acute food insecurity as drought conditions loom. Our humanitarian colleagues say that 1.6 million children are projected to suffer from acute malnutrition between August of this year and July of next year, with more than 400,000 children likely to suffer from severe acute malnutrition. With just weeks left in the year, our $1.6 billion ask for the humanitarian response plan for Somalia is only 44% funded, $690 million in the bank. We need more. This morning, our colleagues from IOM and UNHCR and partners launched a strategy to support the integration of refugees and migrants across 17 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean for the 2025-2026 period. The initiative builds on progress made over the last 5 years, in which 4.5 million migrants and refugees have secured regular status across the region, thanks to measures from host government with international financial support. The new Refugee and Migrant Response Plan seeks $1.4 billion in its first year to support over 2.3 million refugees and vulnerable migrants in their socioeconomic integration, as well, of course, to assist those host community who are generously open their doors to them. This year, over 1.3 million refugees, migrants, and members of host communities benefited from the opportunities provided by the response plan. And this is the start of the month, so we have the food price index. FAO reported today that the benchmark for world food commodity prices rose in November to its highest level since April 2023, increasing by 0.5% from October, driven by surging international vegetable oil quotations. FAO's vegetable oil price index increased by 7.5% in November from October, marking the second largest increase in 2 months and a 32% higher than a year-end level. If I say, buckle your seatbelts for takeoff, what is the International Day? Yes, International Day of Civil Aviation. I basically delivered that one on a silver platter to you. In a message for the 80th anniversary of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, the Secretary General says the organization is a powerful example of multilateralism in action. He added that aviation faces one of its greatest challenges, which is addressing the climate crisis. Accounting for about 2% of global carbon dioxide emissions, aviation is one of the most challenging sectors to decarbonize, but with innovation and with investment, it can be done. Amélie, you almost won. All right, you won.
Thanks, Steph. Just to double-check the figure you gave on Syria displacement people. You said 370,000 displaced people since the beginning of the escalation of hostilities. Just a few hours ago, your colleagues in Geneva said 280,000. So I was wondering if it's just that they had the figure from yesterday and you have the new figures, or if it's not the same date of start.
I would hope that my figures are correct, but I guess this demands some double-checking.
And when you said since the escalation of hostilities, since the 27th of November.
Yeah. Okay. Sylviane Zeil.
Thank you. It's on Syria. With Aleppo, Hama, and now Homs under pro-Turkey control, are Aleppo, Idlib, Hama, and Homs considered to be under Turkish jurisdiction or domination?
I mean, the territorial integrity of Syria needs to be respected, and it continues to be honored by the United Nations. Now, obviously, there are a lot of different groups fighting, and the government doesn't have effective control over all its territory. The extrapolation and analysis I will leave to journalists.
It's not another question. Aleppo is now in Aleppo, the Turkish flag reportedly flies on the citadel, and the Turkish lira has replaced the Syrian currency. Given that Syria is a sovereign country, as you said, how does the United Nations foresee the future of Syria?
Look, the future of Syria needs to belong to the Syrian people, right? We have the political roadmap, Resolution 2254, thank you. And this is what we've been saying since the beginning. It's what Geir Pedersen has been saying from the beginning. We need to return to a political discussion. We need to return to a political solution, to respect the rights and the human rights of every Syrian, to respect Syrian territorial sovereignty and its integrity, to stop going from crisis management to crisis management, but to move to crisis resolution, to find a resolution to this crisis.
The President Bashar is either in Qatar or Moscow forever, with whom you will have to discuss for
Look,
the dialogue.
I have no information about the whereabouts of the President of Syria. We continue to deal with all relevant actors in this, including the government of Syria. Mr. Pedersen spoke to Foreign Minister Sabag not long ago. Madame, and then we'll go to Deji.
Just to follow up on that, you've talked about Geir Peterson meeting with all the parties involved. Is there any movement in getting the parties to talk to each other and come to a peaceful resolution?
We know Mr. Pedersen is on his way to Doha for the Doha Forum. As we've told you, a number of other foreign ministers will be there. We expect him to have some meetings tomorrow. There's also a meeting of the Astana format tomorrow. So let this crisis be an opportunity to move solidly forward on finding a political solution. Deji.
Yeah, several questions. First, also a follow-up on Syria. With the development fastly changing, what is the capacity now for the UN there to offer humanitarian help for those people?
Well, we continue to do whatever we can. Obviously, while combat is ongoing, while fighting is ongoing, it limits our ability to distribute aid. It limits the ability of people to seek aid, right? So you're more in a shelter-in-place situation. There've been other areas. There are other areas of Syria that are not under government control, in which we're able to operate. So I would hope, and I know that as soon as areas are facing less combat, our humanitarian operations can deploy in various ways, either through us or through local partners.
Well, the head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Mr. Jilani, when accepting interviews, he said his objective is to overthrow the Syrian government. What is your reaction?
We do not want to see any more violence. We do not want to see any more fighting. We want to see a political solution so the people of Syria can have the future that they deserve, a future of peace and reconciliation.
Okay, a completely different topic here. The UN Committee of Enforced Disappearances, yesterday, I think December 5th, they released a report on Colombia. I don't know whether the Secretary General is aware of that report or not. In that report, they suggest that over 20,000 unidentified bodies are allegedly stored in a hangar at Bogota's El Dorado International Airport, which got denied by Colombian government. I mean, where did that source come from?
So we're aware of the publication of the preliminary findings of this committee, right, which is an independent committee. It's not an SG-led initiative. And the committee, as you know, is the Committee on Enforced Disappearances. They went to Colombia. The committee, as you know, is made up of independent member states. It monitors the compliance of member states who have adhered to the Convention on the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. It issues recommendations. We're not in a position to, obviously, to comment on these preliminary findings. It's up to the committee to do so, but we will continue to keep an eye on this very closely.
It's very difficult to imagine 20,000 corpses in the hangar.
I'm not debating that point. Okay, Stefano.
Yes,
And then
thank you,
Dulce.
Stéphane. It's a follow-up on Syria. President Erdogan today said that he hoped that the march of these rebels arrived to Damascus without incident. So my question is about the call that the Secretary General had yesterday with President Erdogan. I mean, he told us he had that call, but we didn't really know, first, what he asked to President Erdogan, because he called, he must have asked something, and what Erdogan responded. Erdogan said that he responded, I mean, they released a document about the conversation when they say, I told to Secretary General that Assad didn't respond to demand to
Look,
meet. So my question is, what the Secretary General said or asked to
So,
President Erdogan?
As you can imagine, I'm not going to speak for the presidency of Turkey and share with you what the president said to with the Secretary General. For his part, the Secretary General, this is part of ongoing consultations that he is and will be having with regional players, including as part of the overall work of the UN, including what Mr. Pedersen is doing. The Secretary General's appeal was for greater humanitarian access, obviously, and for recommitment of all the parties and not only the parties in Syria, but the parties, those countries that have an influence over the parties, who are also involved in the region, to recommit to a political process outlined by Resolution 2254. Dulcie.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, given the decimation of Hamas in Gaza, what, if you know, is the health ministry? Is it still operating?
I mean, it is operating in whatever way it can operate. We continue to get casualty figures from them, and we continue to be in touch with them in terms, especially of the functioning, or should we say, non-functioning of the hospitals in Gaza.
So, to your knowledge, it's basically still operating?
It is operating in whatever way it's able to operate, but we continue to have contact with officials in the Ministry of Health.
Okay, and on a separate question, the U.S., have they communicated anything to the UN about possibly reinstating funding to UNRWA under the Biden camp, or is that
I'm not aware
a
of any.
possibility
I'm not
at all?
aware of any change in that
Okay,
department.
thanks.
Okay. Any questions online, and then I'll come back to the room. Okay, Madame Salome.
I'm sure the Secretary General saw this week, when it comes to discussions of Syria in the Security Council, things got pretty heated. There's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of, frankly, back and forth in the Security Council like I haven't seen in a long time. Has he spoken to any of those players, and what would his message be to the United States, Russia, and other outside parties?
His message to the Council is, again, to not to repeat myself, is one of unity and cooperation. This organization, the people of the world benefit from unity of the Security Council, especially when it comes to issues of peace and security. He is happening today to have one of his regular lunches with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So I'm sure those messages will be delivered. Okay, anyone online? Okay, I would ask you just to be patient, maybe come back in exactly 15 minutes for the background briefing on the trip. You come back, thank you. Okay.